get started. We've got lots going on today and a really great presentation ahead of us. So welcome everybody to the Reputation Management webinar hosted by Niagara Connects. My name is Sarah Webster. I'm one of the knowledge brokers with the network, and we've also got Melissa McKay on, who's been speaking a bit as well, our other knowledge broker who's acting as chairperson today in the back end. If you can hear me, then you're in the right spot, but please do make sure you also log in to the online meeting room so that you'll be able to see the slides and participate in the online discussion. For those of you who are new to this technology, the great thing is you just get to sit back and relax. You'll see the slides move on your screen in front of you. And then down the left-hand side of your screen, you have a chat pod where if you have any questions at all during the presentation, feel free to type them into the bottom of the chat pod there, and we'll keep an eye on those and we'll flag them for Brady as appropriate. For now, all of our participant lines are muted, and we know that a lot of people do join in groups, and this helps us allow you to have some conversations in the back end without disrupting the presentation itself. Other than that, Melissa, have we started the recording? Yes, we have, right? I believe? Yes.
I think I saw somewhere it said recording.
Perfect. So we are recording this presentation as we do with all of our learning events with Niagara Connect, and we'll make that available online within about a week, but we'll send an email out to anyone who's registered for this event so that you know that it's up there. We encourage you to please forward on to other colleagues who may not have been able to attend today, but that's our way to continue to stay connected to you as well. Other than that, the presentation itself today will have Brady will be speaking for a little bit and going through his presentation, and then we'll open it up to kind of an online discussion, exchange, question and answer period. So we'll have lots of opportunity for that, and I'm really looking forward to that today too. So I think that's all. As I said, we will be hearing about reputation management, and Brady Wood from the Niagara Health System is going to talk to us using NHS as a case study, talk to us about their experiences with reputation management and a checklist that they've developed as kind of that has come out of those experiences. And then we'll talk a little bit more about how that might be applied in different settings. So I'm going to step back now, put myself on mute, and Brady, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. That was great. Yeah, so I think you've really covered, I think, at a high level what we hope to do today. So really all of what I'm sharing in here is really based in the experience. We've had a fairly long journey over the last 3 years at Niagara Health System. And I also have to credit my other colleague, Mario Joannette, who's the Vice President of Communications at Joseph Brand Hospital, who is also a co-author of the actual tool that came out of this work. So the presentation today is really geared toward hospitals in general, but I think there's broad applicability to both public and private sector in terms of applying either the checklist itself or modifying the ideas in the checklist to fit a particular industry. But in a hospital, there's lots of reasons why reputation is essential. You know, I think at the very highest level, for a hospital, the therapeutic relationship is built on trust, and that was a quote actually from our departed Chief of Staff, Dr. Joanna Hope. But I mean, that's really the center of our mission. People are trusting us with their lives. And you know, I think when a hospital has a poor reputation, there's a downside to that, and we'll talk about that in some detail. Community confidence, and overall, this kind of rolls up into being able to get things done. So getting your agenda to move forward, being able to work with communities and the public to make changes at your organization, and to kind of build partnerships and basically operate in a healthy work environment. So I think where we kind of started, and I'll get into our kind of case study, but where we started was both Mario and I found, and we're guilty of it as well, there's no real kind of standard or kind of in general methodology about how to do public relations for a hospital. There's a lot of great literature in terms of best practices, and we'll talk about that today. But there hadn't really been that roll up. And then in the worst case scenario, where a hospital gets into the kind of some of the worst trouble it can get into is when the province, the Minister of Health has the ability to appoint a supervisor, and typically when that happens, it means that the board is relieved of its duties. A provincial appointee comes in and kind of takes the helm of the hospital and tries to regain that community confidence. So we kind of saw this correlation happening a lot. And one thing I always say as a caveat, and I really mean it, anytime this has happened, it's not the board's fault or the PR person's fault or the CEO's fault. I mean, a hospital is a terribly complex, difficult, in some cases, environment. And I think, despite everyone's best efforts, sometimes you run into trouble, and sometimes it's difficult to establish the kind of coalitions you need to be able to operate and maintain that community confidence. So for us, it wasn't about, someone's done a bad job, we can do a better job. We really started with, how do we build on what we've seen and learn from it, and try to help folks to avoid some of the pitfalls we've seen in our organizations and other organizations. So a bit about Mario and I. So I was, previous to my role in Niagara, I was at St. Joseph's Health System on the executive team there, and in charge of both strategy and the public relation role for an 8-organization consortium. And now Niagara has a very healthy relationship with them, and we have a management services agreement for the CEO there. So we actually contract CEO services from St. Joseph's Health System. I've worked in healthcare admin since 2003, and so I have been kind of, in my career, been fascinated by these kind of reputational challenges. And I know the slide here mentions it, a bit of shameless self-promotion, but I've been, for example, helping the Arab community in Canada with some of its communications work as my role as board chair at the moment for that institute. And similarly, Mario had previously done a lot of government communication style work and was brought in at Joe Brandt. And the one similarity there is we were both brought in as these organizations were recovering from reputational damage, in part related to C. difficile outbreaks. So I alluded to this, but essentially Joseph Brandt had gone through a C. difficile outbreak in 2006, and it had largely damaged and badly damaged the reputation of the hospital and the community. Niagara Health System was a much more complicated situation insofar as after the merger of 7 hospitals, it sort of had a bumpy road for about 10 years. So I don't think there was great community acceptance of the merger, some of the plans that had been put on the table, suggestions of hospital closures, et cetera. And then that culminated in a very hot crisis, which was a C. difficile crisis, which was conveyed in such a way through, again, I don't think anyone's fault, it essentially led to the community losing confidence in the hospital and using that as kind of the ultimate issue to call for provincial supervisorship. So we've had a really great effort since to regain the community confidence, and I'll show some stats that I think demonstrate that we're headed at least in the right direction, although I think this is a very incremental process. And then lastly, St. Joseph's Health System is, I alluded to this, but they've had a really strong reputation, and as a result of that, and this is the environment I came from, they've been very successful in provincial investment, national profile, and kind of building an agenda toward being really widely recognized as a great place for patient care. So those were the kind of the 3 institutional backgrounds that we were coming from. And then I hope you folks will get these slides, but then I think there were some trends informing the checklist as well that we kind of took into account. And I think the big one for me is the last point on this slide, which is the point that PR spin, I think, today is essentially dead. I think it's very difficult to say that you can sugarcoat a crisis or redirect an inquiring media when folks are very quick-witted and they're used to kind of those old school PR tactics, and I think they are really looking for authenticity. And I do direct folks, as one of my mentors has to me, to the A.W. Page Society. So that's a society in the U.S. They have a great kind of cycle of reports coming out of that institute, but there's a great report there on authenticity. You also see a steady stream of organizations dealing with crises, and with mixed results. Some folks recover very well, like Maple Leaf, and again, that was a study conducted by one of my mentors, Dr. Terry Flynn. And then you have others that kind of hobble along or end in complete disaster. And so you do again see kind of a lack of standard around how different organizations are dealing with that, with different fallout. I'm always fascinated by the Tiger Woods example, where some researchers in California actually demonstrated that the organizations that sponsored him, when compared to the stock market performance, because of his kind of failure to manage that crisis properly, lost actually billions of dollars in market value through the kind of machinations of the market and people responding to his messaging. So you can have dramatic consequences in the private sector, but also in the public. And then, like I said, the locally, and by locally I mean within the in the hospital environment, there are lots of other drivers. We've had an economic downturn, and we're constantly having to communicate about sort of budget shortfalls and addressing them, or with a shortfall of skilled providers, we're having to amalgamate centralized programs into centers of excellence so that we have critical mass of the number of particular providers all under one roof. It's shown to increase quality. And these are things that are difficult to convey to the public. And I think it's also, we've got these complex political environments both provincially and locally. And then the other kind of trends that I talked about. And also there is really this kind of push at a government level to really kind of firm up community engagement. And it is a criteria from the LHIN to say if you're making a change, you've done community engagement. And we have seen instances where hospitals have not really been able to do that in a way that's garnered confidence of the folks watching those processes roll out. So what we really hoped was, in thinking about this, and I'll show the checklist in a couple of slides, but we wanted to figure out what are all the areas at a high level that we could standardize, and how do we do it in a way that it's not too terribly prescriptive. And what we ultimately hoped would be the outcome is increasing trust universally across the health system, being able to manage crises and bolster the organization's reputation, and obviously, have better relationships with the media so that those outcomes are better, and then also obviously just having community confidence and strong partnerships, et cetera. So maybe wishful thinking on our part. You'll have to tell me when we get to chat. But we ultimately hoped if this was circulated and we actually did a good job, and I can talk a bit about how we consulted and got other people to feed into the process. We'd hope that could be the punchline. But I alluded to, this was when Mario and I were presenting. Sorry, this is a segue slide here. I guess the other thing is, sorry, I forgot to mention these slides on inspiration, but there are some places where we got these ideas from. So you'll know in healthcare, we talk a lot about checklists in the last decade or so. So they started using an ICU checklist in U.S. hospitals, and it lowered mortality. Same thing with the surgical checklist. And then the one that really inspired us was the Institute of Medicine launched a CEO checklist for high-value healthcare. And so it was really high level what leaders could tick off, et cetera. And in terms of, these could be drivers of quality, we wanted to talk about the drivers of reputation. And again, I think that's something that was lacking in the existing tools for senior leaders. So when we did consult, we did talk to CEOs and executives, hospital PR professionals and PR leaders in the health system. We talked to the OHA, we talked to government, and then we also talked to the amazing leadership at McMaster at the MCM program, which has now become a really nationally recognized program in communications. And I'm completing my degree in that program, and then as a result of our interactions, Mario actually entered the master's program, so entering kind of in a mid-stage in his career to do that master's. So that's sort of how we got to the point of developing it. And I'll bring it up. I don't know if folks did get the checklist, but if not, we'll make sure that it's available in a PDF to you folks. It's available free, and essentially where we have landed with the OHA, which is exciting, is they are adopting it as a best practice. So at the OHA Health Achieve conference this year, we're going to be sort of leading the seminar section on reputation management, and we'll invite other speakers as well to contribute content. And then also we're drawing on this to develop an actual OHA guide to reputation management, which will contain the checklist, but will probably be about a 150-page document of different tools for hospitals to use in standardizing their approach. And that work we're actually doing with the OHA and with McMaster, who have agreed to be our partners on it. But maybe just to run through the content of the checklist, we really viewed it as, how do we keep it high level so we're not telling CEOs exactly what they should do. I just noted Sarah Webster's just posted in the bottom left that the link to actually download these materials, so hope you folks will take us up on that. Yeah, we really wanted it to be a board and executive level exercise where folks were talking about reputation, recognizing the importance, and then going through these steps. So we're now moving from just having the checklist to also having a method to evaluate each kind of subsection. But as you can see, they fall into different things. Board and executive, that they have a vision and are interested in monitoring reputation management, that the organization is bolstering its reputation through many means, including positive media stories, that they take the right approach to media relations, and I do firmly believe there's a right approach, and that's that we respect the media as valuable colleagues in communicating with the public, and that many studies and other work that's shown that actually leads to a good result. That we follow a methodology that's evidence-based for crisis communications, and that proactively we anticipate at some point in the life of our organizations we'll have a crisis, so we have done some pre-planning, and at least that everyone agrees on the approach. Then social media, at the very least, we're saying that hospitals need to, it's sort of like a phone line. Maybe when the phone first came out, people wondered if they would be used, but for practical purposes, everyone should at least have a phone and answer it if it rings. And similarly for social media, we think everyone should at least have the address and be monitoring for activity that's related to them at a bare minimum. And then obviously building from that, it can be a great way of building a really positive narrative about your organization and having a direct route of informing the public of what's going on inside your shop. Relationships, we would go through a list of relationships that we think are important, and also that they are well tracked and have good feedback loops, and this also speaks to community engagement. That public relations people, that you actually have some on staff and that they're trained professionals, however you want to frame that is fine, but I think that to not have a lead person or to have someone be unclear about whose responsibility it is would be a bad situation, and that has happened in some organizations. And then the last two are just that you buy into transparency and that you believe in a positive way of handling complaints so that they don't become reputational challenges. So that's a big overview of the checklist. And the other thing I'd be remiss if I didn't mention is the caveat, which is that the number one driver of reputation has nothing to do with all these things, but really has to do with strong performance in the areas that are important. And so for hospitals, we basically say that's patient experience, safety and quality, employee engagement, and financial health. And most, if not all, hospitals in Ontario will have those as kind of 4 priority areas. So just moving ahead into kind of the use of the checklist, the one thing we thought I would do is give a couple examples. So I'm not going to go through every quadrant, but this would be a bit of a preview of how folks could use this. So at a board level, we would really ask the board to endorse and talk about reputation and think about what's their vision for how they'd like the hospital to be perceived. And then think about what are the measures or a scorecard that could be developed that could be discussed at that level so that everyone's agreeing that they're on the right track. And so some folks on the line will surely know a bit about governance. So we really thought about reputation. There's a trend in governance called generative governance. So a lot of boards in different models are kind of like a rubber stamp or a more policy-based governance. But there's a new trend emerging that says governors also have strategic, kind of creative work to contribute to the organization. And there are areas of discussion where management and board can kind of expand the conversation before letting management do its job. And so we really thought that this is the conversation about reputation could fall into this area of generative governance. And it also fits into the strategic plan. So most hospital strategic plans look like this pie chart on the left. They have those 4 quadrants. Some have a 5th that has academics and teaching as well. And what we were really advocating is you actually get reputation management as a core component of the strategic plan, and that would be something that would happen at a board and executive level. So that's one example of how folks could start to tackle chunks of the checklist. Another is in the same quadrant is the whole notion of measurement. So I found measuring in PR is difficult. Often you don't have the best metrics. Often you can't find metrics. I think of things often like a newsletter. How do you measure the impact of the newsletter? We can probably get creative when we're talking later about how to do that. But I think the key is we really do have to do that. So I started my kind of PR journey, probably about 2008 at St. Joe's. So in 2009, and this was at St. Joe's Hamilton, I was basically tasked by the leadership at the time, and it was Kevin Smith was the president, the chief of staff was Dave Higgins, and the board chair was a guy named Tony Valeri, and they all said, we need to have a reputation for good research. We're doing great research here, and we don't get any coverage about our research. And I agreed, and we looked back at the data and essentially found that we weren't getting any hits. So after a bit of a concerted effort, using measurement as a tool, we were able to drive it, and you'll see on this slide that research actually became the #1 category that we had kind of positive media hits in. And so as soon as you start measuring, you then have the impetus to go out and make the change. Part of the strategy there, just to give a little glimpse into what we did, is we did a bit of a roadshow. We met with research leaders on a very regular basis. It became part of their evaluation by the VP research that we were doing knowledge translation that hit the public sphere. And here's what the chart looked like. So this was Hamilton Spectator data for St. Joe's over the period on the chart. So each positive hit is on the blue line, each positive media article, and each negative media article is on the red line. So very nice to see. We always had a fairly low amount of negative media, and we had a higher proportion of positive media, usually always. But then you can see after we kind of started this concerted effort that this line went up, and it is correlated back to the research numbers as well. And so now I can give you a glimpse of where we've kind of evolved to today at Niagara Health System. So this is some of our most recent current data. And you'll see up here in the top left quadrant the media metrics that we're tracking. So again, these metrics are a blunt instrument. They're not very sophisticated, but it's something we can manage internally. And the way this works is we literally look at all of the media we generate every day, and we assign it either a positive and negative or a neutral value. And so the positive and the negative end up on the chart, and the neutral do not. The reason why I call it a blunt instrument is so one letter to the editor in a Pelham paper will get the same negative rating as a very large spread front page positive article. So we're not really having a great way of valuing, but we just value positive and negative. And as you can still see, you can still track some pretty meaningful data. So in July of 2011, was sort of when we really started this tracking, we had a very high proportion of negative to positive media. And I know some of my colleagues from the department are on the line, so they can correct me if I'm wrong, but when I believe we look back, that kind of trend, high negative, low positive, had continued back quite a long time, not reflecting anything other than the fact that the organization had a challenging time. And once we started working on it, as of December 2011, every month after that we've had lower negative than positive media, and we really do strive now that we're really measuring to get a ratio of 5 to 1 positive to negative every month. So we're not quite there yet, but as you can still see, the two trend lines that are on there, which are the dotted lines, show that our positive media on aggregate is going up and the negative media is going down. So those are two very good trends. And then underneath here is something we do as a department is we look at every month what were the areas where we had positive and where did we have negative. And then if there are opportunities to do things about the negative, we would try. But you can see reflected here, it's also a very good sign that some of these things are beyond our control, like being embroiled in some of the discussions at a municipal level that land in the paper. That's not reflecting bad quality of care. And I think the other thing to note is that we really do strive that the number one goal when it comes to media is that we're seeking media that reinforces that we're giving world-class care in Niagara and that we have really competent people working here. So maybe if I move over to the top right, you also see we do polling every year. And so polling is a sort of pseudo-scientific tool, and I know I'm probably running a little low on time, so I won't get into too much detail here. But we've done polling every year, and again we're seeing that there's been an increase in public perception of nearly 25% since 2011. And then through polling, it's a great tool because you can then identify why people think that. So the top 3 reasons people have a good opinion of us are we take good care of them, they are satisfied, and we have good doctors, good nurses, good staff. The reasons for a bad opinion are long wait times, the threat of closing facilities, or bad experiences. And then drilling down further, I know it's hard to see, but this is also with the drivers of whether people think we're moving in the right or the wrong direction. So there's very valuable data in planning. And then lastly, we've got to get back on this, but we used to do influencer input. So I have a list of 70 people that are influencers, elected officials in the community. Not all are, on board with our plan. Some we have sometimes a healthy but challenging relationship with, and we looked for their feedback. So I would call them, and as we were chatting about issues, I'd say, we do this exercise where I report one sentence from folks like you. Would you give me a sentence to appear in our metrics? And again, so this is just a type of qualitative data, nothing very sophisticated. So the polling is probably the most sophisticated part. We can't do that on our own, but everything else is actually quite an easy way to get some data. And so I'll probably, I've covered off a lot of this. I think another area on the checklist has to do with crisis communication. So I think that again, we're saying we want people to have a plan. We want them to have their spokespeople trained in advance and have a protocol for advising partners. But I think the most important part for me is that the plan is sort of evidence-based or evidence-informed. So there's a giant wealth of public relations literature, and I just use this as one example, but Timothy Coombs is a very celebrated PR researcher, and in 2007 he started publishing on this notion of situational crisis communications theory. And essentially the notion was, this isn't a very good diagram of it, and as part of our work with the OHA, we're actually trying to build something sophisticated that would show this in a better light. But essentially what he has is more a heuristic. It's kind of a shorthand of how to figure out what type of crisis you're dealing with, and then what strategies would go with it. So if it's not your fault, you have some options. If it is kind of your fault, but it's not that bad, there's some other options. So this is one of kind of half dozen or dozen researchers where we've tried to extract the best practices and really build it into our plans. And I think that's probably the most important part. I think if folks like Tiger Woods or Lac Mégantic railway CEO or other folks that have had some kind of colossal communications failures in the midst of crisis, if they'd been prepped and had thought through, what actually works in the literature and what doesn't, the outcome would obviously be better. And then I also did mention media relations. So I can't stress this strongly enough, but I think the really key thing in dealing with the media is the relationship can always feel adversarial. And I've been there. We've done a lot of work in Niagara and had a lot of tough talks with folks where the things may get heated, but ultimately the important underlying fact is that you value them as colleagues, you treat them with respect, try to get that back to them in a timely fashion, try to be honest, and really get to know what they're looking to cover. So I had a really odd interaction when I was first at St. Joe's. It was actually related to that earlier story I talked to you about research media coverage. And so I was sent to we kind of brainstormed, and the president and others had said, well, can you go talk to the editor at the paper? So I won't name the person in question, but I went to go see the managing editor of the paper at the time. And I obviously didn't know what I was doing, but I kind of walked in very confidently and said, I really need to talk to you about, we need to make sure I'm getting more positive media. And I thought I was doing the right thing, but I probably came off a bit, at the least, naive, and at best, it just didn't go over well. But instead of kind of shaming me or it hurting the relationship, he actually said, look, I know you're new to this, so let me give you some advice. You can't come in and talk to the editor of a newspaper and say, you've got to give me good coverage or else, or whatever it was I was conveying. He said, but what you can do is you can get to know the reporter. You can get to know what they're about, what they're trying to accomplish, and try to approach it that way. So that's very much informed my practice since, and we've done that here as well. Getting to know what reporters like or what's exciting to them really helps. And a good example of that was our recent coverage, which was a driver of some really spectacular great media for us around the live coverage of the implant of a cardiac stent. So that was just in May. And essentially it was born of a conversation to say, would you folks be interested in live covering the event? But the background thinking to that is, how do we keep our positive media stats high? How do we convey that we have competent people providing world-class care? And then perhaps most importantly, how do we get interest in a story that's just an everyday story? Stents are put into people's bodies probably tens of thousands of times a day across the globe. So how do you make that story interesting again? And that's sort of what we came up with, was live tweeting the event, letting the reporters in the room, finding a patient who was low enough risk but was willing to participate. So, but it also looped back to trusting the reporters as colleagues that they weren't going to cover something in a way that would destroy our reputation recklessly. I'm always in favor of, I'm the first person to apologize if we've done something wrong, but I don't think in any case the reporters are really out on a vendetta to embarrass people, and so that's really been an important driver and something that we think can help the industry. So I think I've got this done in about 30 minutes. Like I said, Mario's due a ton of credit for this, the folks at McMaster, Terry Flynn and Alex, and a lot of other folks, and we really hope that the checklist might be of value to you. We don't consider it closed, so we're continuing to work on the project. And also we have been willing on occasion to go to groups that want to hear more. So if there's a group that said, we really want to use this, we'd like you to come and see us, we're obviously open to doing that as well. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Brady. That was I was scribbling notes on my end and tweeting at the same time, so it was really interesting. Thank you. I'd like to open it up to our participants on the call, and please feel free to either type in questions or comments using the chat pod down the left-hand side of your screen, or you can speak up. We've got a smaller group today, so if you want to chime in, press *7 to unmute your individual line. We'd love to hear from you. And I'd love to hear from people in terms of, within your own organization, what challenges you've faced with reputation management, what some of your successes have been, and if anyone else has any tools that they've used to kind of inform their practice out there. Brady, I found your examples in particular around like governance, the measurement, crisis communications, and media relations were really great because they gave a practical example, so I'd love to hear from other organizations.
So sorry, I see, yep, Mary's chimed in.
It says, Brady, could you comment on selecting a spokesperson who embodies authenticity, credibility, and an ability to address complex message delivery?
Yeah, I did want to just address one thing before I answer that. There's one important point that I should have made at the beginning and the end of this presentation, and that's that any success that our organization has had in this area is not my success, but definitely the success of my team. So I know some of those folks are listening in, but we have a small, feisty PR team here that's doing excellent work. So I see Caroline Bork-Wiley has logged in, and she's the director of the department. Steve Gallagher and Anna Cobian, and then we also have someone doing community engagement, Sonia Camprise. So I think if those folks are listening, I did want to acknowledge that. I mean, I'm maybe in some kind of leadership role, but these are the folks that are really doing a ton of work. But so on Mary's question, could you comment on selecting a spokesperson who embodies authenticity, credibility, and ability to address complex message delivery? Mary, I think you're kind of pointing to a whole kind of gray area for me that I haven't actually figured out. And what I mean is sometimes you end up with leaders, and I'm not saying it's not been the case here, but I can envision a situation where someone joins an organization and the CEO or others are not optimal spokespeople. And it's it's kind of a very tough line to walk to tell the person you're reporting to that they need to improve if they're not willing to hear that. And it's also, they're ultimately driving the bus. So you can have the best crisis plan in the world, but if the person's not willing to follow it, you can imagine the outcome won't be very good. A great example of that from recent history would be Rob Ford. So I know some folks that have been in and around that group of people that were in the mayor's office, and it actually sounds like Rob Ford was getting very good advice that he just would not follow. So, that whole thing is difficult. But one thing that I've found helpful is we very quickly at Niagara, Caroline's due a lot of credit for this as well, we kind of built our own internal media training program. So now we can very easily educate people through a slide deck, film them doing a simulated interview, and give them feedback. But you always have to do this very cautiously. People will take things very personally, and you've got to have them leaving the room feeling better about themselves and their ability to communicate, not worse. So that's kind of the fine line to walk. But I think if you have your choice, I think it's always good to try to think about who is a good communicator, who has credibility and background knowledge in the area you're addressing. I mean, like I said, at NHS we've been really privileged, in particular with Kevin Smith's communications ability. But I hope some of the thoughts I mentioned on that are helpful. So I see Brian Hutchings. How has your media relations effort evolved with an era of increasingly fragmented news media landscape? Good question, Brian. I think I think we've kind of just been rolling with the punches, and in Niagara in particular, I found it difficult to see some of the media shops shrinking in size, people you're used to working with going elsewhere, new entities coming up. So I think that in the past, so for example, I think something that, again, through no one's fault, but NHS struggled when sort of Bullet News came online as an investigative journalism blog, but that was very new. That was something no one had seen. Is it a legitimate media entity? Isn't it? Of course it is, but that's hindsight's 2020. So I think that ultimately would still like to adhere to the principle in the checklist, which is get to know the reporters, get to know the editors, get to know what they're about, and establish some level of trust about how folks are going to navigate waters going forward. If I get a request, this is what you folks can expect of me, and they'll say this is what you can expect of us. And I think that's at least a good place to start. But it's harder here with 3 dailies, 7 or 8 weeklies, Bullet News, radio, a lot of entities. In Hamilton, I maybe dealt with 1 or 2 entities at any time, and here you could deal with all of those on a particularly sensitive or tough issue. So I'm not sure I answered your question, Brian, but I took a run at it. I hope it was okay.
Thanks, Brady. And I just put a question out to participants. I'd love to hear if anyone has any experience with reputation management in those areas that Brady talked about, with governance, media relations, measurement, and crisis communications. Do anyone have any processes in place that have been particularly successful in those areas, we'd love to hear from you. Just building on what you said, we're talking about there, Brady, with the fragmented media. I think too, and our team at NextConnex was talking about this morning, that just in an age of information overload, how do you make sure that the message that you're sending out is not only credible but relevant to your audience too, is something that they're going to be able to take away and do something with, or that positively influences how they see you and your reputation. Mary asks, do you have any further tips for engaging board members in the reputation management process?
Thanks, Mary. I mean, from my perspective, what I found in most of the places I've worked is that the board are usually the people that are actually most excited about this. So I think, just as an example, as we repopulated the board here in Niagara, the thing that I would often get kind of engagement with board members about was, oh, this media article, how is it handled? What does it mean? This is the stuff that affects them in the community as they're representing an organization. If an organization is going through a tough time, the board members are getting questions from their peers and other folks out there. So I think it's something that is top of mind for most board members. But I think, what we really hope is that a tool like this coming onto a board agenda will kind of raise awareness, and at the very least could just be used for a kind of high-level discussion around what the board thinks. But I ultimately think the key is getting it to be a priority that's top of mind with both, at the very least, the CEO and board. And I think it will vary by organization how easy it'll be to get that on the agenda. Hope that helps, Mary.
Brady, then, kind of expanding on that, what's the role then of frontline staff in reputation management, especially in bigger, I think about organizations I've been part of where it's, some big changes have been happening that the community is aware of, and often, they're asking, oh, you work at that organization, and, asking for that kind of frontline view. What's the role of staff in that?
Well, I think all staff are kind of ambassadors for the organization, and I think it's tougher when you have situations like that, like it's a crisis at the organization or an issue that's landing in the paper. I think in a perfect world we would find some mechanism of enabling our managers to talk to staff face-to-face about how the organization is coping and moving through, and maybe even give them some scripting. But I know that that's not always possible, but obviously they are essential, and really the front line in a lot of our organizations that is the impression the public have of the organization. You can see in our data from the poll that's a big driver of both public positive perception and negative perception is interactions with the front line. So I think in the best case it would be great if one could be organized enough to have some scripting and have managers that are very comfortable in their communication roles interfacing with the front line. But that's kind of more my gut reaction. I wouldn't say it's something that we've kind of knocked out of the park yet. And so Mary says, do you have any observations utilizing social media tools to guide your research and tracking? I probably, if I'm reading you right, Mary, it's kind of what tools do you use to keep track of social media? So the one, correct me if I'm wrong for sure, but the one that I'm most familiar with is kind of Hootsuite, which is something where you can, it's an app that'll track several of your social media inputs, and I believe Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn for sure, and then you can synchronize across those sites. But I think it's quite good for monitoring, depending on the size of your organization. Another thing is just being engaged and monitoring on your own is also possible. But if it's for roll up, I think that there are several tools that will allow you to kind of roll up and track that data. I'm not sure what you meant on the research side, i.e. to what extent do you rely on social media to monitor issues you may want to address? So I'd say, Mary, we're getting more sophisticated at this. We really try to, if we're mentioned in an issue in social media, we'd like to respond quickly. If someone's had a negative experience and they tweet about it, in a perfect world we try to answer that tweet within an hour if that's possible, to say at the very least, we're concerned you've had a bad experience, how can we help? please get in touch. But then there are some dicier things. So you could be having a concerned party try to engage you on a chat about a controversial topic that you're maybe not wanting to do that on Twitter. And I don't have a great answer for that because it's so nuanced when those kinds of things happen. Another example of where things can go wrong, of course, are these kind of hashtag things where the most recent one top of mind is Robin Thicke, who's the singer of Blurred Lines, had this online question session where you could ask Robin Thicke a question, and then people started asking him questions around misogynistic lyrics and kind of what a crummy husband he'd been. And I'm summarizing, but that can be the downside. So thinking you're going to launch something on social media, like a hashtag, there could be a peril to that if there are detractors listening who could seize that opportunity. I'm not sure I totally answered your question, Mary, but I'm happy to chat whenever you've got time. So Carrie Beattie, hi Carrie. Carrie's a great friend and public health, and thanks for tuning in. Most often PR professionals are seen as operational. Any tips for PR folks on how to gain the confidence from your governing body or executive to include PR in those planning and decision-making conversations? Yeah, I think I think it's something that we collectively have kind of fetishized this, because it is true. I think often we're seen as a support department. So in some cases you have an executive that's making decisions and then they come to PR at the tail end and say, okay, help us just communicate this. And so you haven't really had that input at a high level. And I think that's something we've all probably had to struggle with at some point in our career. The only thing I can say is, building your relationship with your leaders and trying to demonstrate interesting findings, like some of the things I hope you found it valuable that I've tried to convey in today's presentation. You've kind of got to let the door open, and it'll happen incrementally into this world of there's good research, the discipline's professionalizing, best practices are emerging, and we've all got to be champions of that, because it wasn't too long ago that HR as a profession was in a similar boat to us, but now they're highly professionalized, and there's a credentialing process that is often very widely accepted, and so you may not be hired if you don't have certain credentials in HR, and I think that's where we're moving to. Is it won't be as professionalized as being a lawyer, I don't think, but we should aspire to that, and I think by being strategic and being proactive about demonstrating to other leaders you're working with where we can add value. And I think I'd also say, and I've heard this particularly from Terry Flynn at McMaster, but the measurement piece is a big deal, and I really agree with that. Like if I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but if I flip back to this slide, like as soon as you kind of come to a meeting with a chart like this, I think this is the kind of thing that a lot of executives are used to seeing, or a lot of MBA programs would emphasize in different areas of the operation. So as soon as you've got a methodology and some rigor behind your metrics, I think metrics can be powerful as well. I hope that helps.
Brady, it's Sarah here. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about the checklist itself and how you plan to use it within NHS, but how others might use it? Is it something that's reviewed regularly as just a check and balance, or an evaluation tool? Like how do you use it being used?
Yeah, I think in a perfect world, I mean, just reviewing it, and you could start it very simply. Can we tick these boxes, yes or no? So have our board and executive endorsed a vision? No? Well, we probably have to design an exercise to do that. So that would be one very simple way of doing it. I like the idea of keeping it live, and I do think we're trying to move toward a more kind of interesting way of self-evaluating, and then being able to have suggestions for, let's say, I'll just give you an example. If you ranked yourself a 3 out of 5 on crisis, well, we might have an accompanying chart which would be able to tell you, well, here are some other things you would want to do to move from a 3 to a 5, for example. But I think having the conversation and then working towards some kind of metrics and feedback loop, I think is a really great start.
Thank you.
In terms of NHS, I wouldn't say that, in terms of the use of this document, it's been widely used, it's been circulated. I think it guides our work as a team, but I actually think this checklist is not really guiding our team so much as I've taken the DNA of our team and put it into this checklist. So, for us, another thing I'd mention, I'm sure everyone's experienced this, is sometimes it's really hard to be a prophet in your own land. So I think that although outside of our organizations, and Mario's experienced the same thing, we're getting a ton of energy. The OHA wants to make this a standard practice for all hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. At our own organization, it's kind of like, no, that's great, Brady, and keep calm and carry on, and that's an okay message, but I think everyone experienced that. Sometimes to bring a new idea into an organization, it can't be an existing person within the organization to do that, and so that might be where Mario and I can provide value to other folks, is you bringing this to your senior team. They may say that's nice, and hopefully they'll say, yeah, let's accept it and use it, but you may get greater value out of, for example, having someone external come in and kind of preach on your behalf, for lack of a better term.
That's a great point, Brady. And I find it interesting that you said that, as much your team DNA is in this checklist. And I'd be interested to see for others, if you do take this back to your organization, if you do feel like you need to adapt this or massage it to meet the language maybe within your own organization, so that it does kind of resonate with your staff or your executive or board. We'd love to hear back if anyone does take this and use it. We'd love to hear about how that goes.
Yeah, as would we, for sure. No, we'll definitely be trying to track this stuff. And like I said, it's not really proprietary information. We're not, we have some copywriting going on with it, but that doesn't mean you couldn't adapt it for your own use, and that we wouldn't be in any way, we didn't do this for profit. We actually did it for free, and we continue to do this work, obviously, all for free, to just kind of advance our industry, really.
Do we have any other, I'm just going to, as we kind of move into the last part of discussion, put up some contact information there for those who do want to reach out if you have any other comments or you want to share how you might use the tool. But any other questions or comments from folks on the phone today? And again, if you want to speak, it's *7 to unmute your line. Okay, well, I'm going to take a couple minutes here to just put up some evaluation questions that we use at Niagara Connects at the end of each of our learning events, so then we can kind of keep tailoring them to meet your needs in our community. So if you can take a couple minutes to answer those. As I said before, we are recording this event, and we will make it available to you within about a week with the slides that we talked about, and of course we'll point you again at that time to the checklist and other material we have online on the Niagara Knowledge Exchange. We'll put the link up there today, but please do explore the Niagara Knowledge Exchange. There's lots of related content on there that can help inform your own work and your own practice. Other than that, though, I'd like to thank you, Brady, for taking the time today.
Thanks so much. Yeah, this was great. I really enjoyed it. I hope folks found it useful.
I certainly did. So thank you very much. And we've had some great comments here from participants on the phone as well.
Agreed.
So please, everybody, go forth, enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully you've got some sun and you can get outside and enjoy this nice weather we're having as well. But that's all. Thank you very much, Brady, and thank you to everyone on the phone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.